I don't think it matters the order, but we'll get that one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good photograph.
And that's the original.
And did your mother keep all of this stuff, Stuart?
Yes, yeah. And we all got pictures like that one.
Send this one home, or?
Yes, yeah.
That's
It was
good.
taken just before they were killed. And we have been to that.
Walking from the camera. Hope it's going. Okay, we're good. Oh, Stuart, I better make sure the microphone's on. Okay. Can you just say something so I can...
Yes, happy to be here today.
Perfect.
Through the snow and wind.
Yes. Okay. It's December 6th, 2000 at the Commonwealth Air Training Plan Museum in Brandon, and we're here with Stuart Johnson. Now, can I please have your name and where you grew up?
My name is Stuart Johnson, and I grew up in various places. I was born in Beulah, Manitoba, lived in Birtle during the war years, and Salzgirth, Manitoba, and then to Crandall.
Oh.
And then from there I began railroading for 13 years as a telegraph operator.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
then, of course, the railroad started to close down, and I went back to school and for 6 years, and graduated from Brandon College. The last year was
Right.
Brandon College, and then taught after that in Winnipeg until I retired some 13 years ago.
Oh, I didn't know that you worked on the railroads.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty neat. So you saw the whole country then? pretty
Good.
much.
Well, from Broadview in the west on the main line to Brandon was my home territory.
Right.
But I also worked down east one year, just near the head of the lakes,
Oh.
at a little place called Wraith.
Oh, neat.
But the rest of the time I lived out in this part of the country.
Yeah. So you grew up, you were in Birtle then during the war years?
Yes.
And was your father a farmer there?
No, my father was a grain buyer.
Oh.
And then he had to leave grain buying because the dust got him, as it did with many of the men. They had no circulation of air, and the dust just hung in them and of course got into their lungs.
Right.
So then we went to Salzgirth, where he managed a co-op store,
Oh.
and then we moved to Crandall, where he bought his own store.
Oh, okay.
And both my parents are buried in Crandall.
So in Birtle then there was you and your parents and brothers and sisters?
Brothers and sisters, although my eldest brother, that we'll talk about later on, had gone to university by that time, and
Oh, okay.
my eldest brother, I said, I hope.
Yes.
And my sister, who is the eldest in the family, and she'll love me for saying that, had by that time gone to Ottawa to work for the Navy.
Oh.
And she worked for the Navy all during the war in the department where they get the telegrams ready to send to next of kin after there had been a lot of sinkings. You know how the convoys were attacked, and many were lost. And so she worked in that department,
Oh, gosh.
which has a lot of stories to it. I'll probably bring one or two into this
Oh, wow.
conversation. And my brother that was killed overseas had come into Winnipeg to take engineering.
Oh,
And
okay.
he finished engineering, all but one subject. He didn't write it because if he had written it, he would have become an engineer,
Right.
a civil engineer, and he would have had to have been in the army because he had gone into some army training to pay for his university.
Oh,
And
I see.
so he left that one until he came back, but he would have finished that up before long. My other brother, brother next to me, moved with us to Bertle, and he finished his high school in Bertle, and then went into Winnipeg to university. And from there, after a year of university, he felt he had to join up too, so he joined the Air Force. So I had two brothers in the Air Force and a sister in the Navy, and I was the little guy that stayed at home and collected scrap metal for the war effort.
Yeah. What was it like at home in a town on the prairies during the war, Stu? Was it everyone involved in the war effort? A lot of people?
Oh,
or?
quite,
Yeah.
yes. The kids and some of the adults, of course, gathered scrap metals, copper, aluminum, steel, etc., and it was all shipped away.
Right.
And bones, which were helped to make explosives.
Oh.
And I didn't know that. And the other thing that we collected that I didn't know about for many years was silver paper out of the cigarette boxes.
Oh.
And it was all taken and made into great big sheets and then cut into thin strips of
Tinfoil.
tinfoil at very with two main lengths, and it was thrown out in bundles out of the airplane. It was called a window,
Right.
or some called a chaff,
Right.
and it threw the German radar off. And the first raid it was used on was Cologne, and not one aircraft was lost on that raid.
Wow.
And apparently all the German guns at the end of that raid were pointing straight up, still firing at window.
Oh gosh.
And it was used all through the war, even to the point where they used it all during the night before the D-Day invasion in France to throw off the German radar so it didn't pick the ships
Right.
up coming
Right.
over.
Pretty handy invention, that one.
Yes, it was. Yeah. But of course, very secret
Right.
to us.
So you didn't know what your collections were being used
No,
for at the time?
no,
eh?
we could see the steel and the copper, of
Right.
course, for shells, but that was about all we knew of. But all the kids were involved in that. The parents were involved in knitting sweaters and things to keep the guys warm, and the ladies warm. Let's not forget there were
Right.
a lot of ladies that served too. And they packed boxes of food.
Like packages? to
Yes,
send? Oh.
and sent to them. We tried to send one a month to all the young men and ladies from that town
The area, yeah.
that we were in. And so they would get together on a day and package these all up. And of course the families would send one
Right.
to their sons or whatever, and usually put in some warm mittens and scarves and things, because let's face it, it was cold for these guys in England because it was very damp, and in the wintertime they just about froze. In fact, my brother set up a heater from a light bulb in his bed,
Oh,
almost burned the
really?
bed up.
Oh, no.
But yes, it was very cold. But everyone was in on it. Our gas was rationed, of course. We didn't travel.
Right.
It was the end of the 30s anyway, and we'd been used to not traveling. No one could afford it.
Yeah.
And then food was rationed, but the only food that really bothered us, or the only rationed food that ever bothered us, was sugar.
Mm.
Being in a farming community, there was always lots of butter. We had lots of meat. And what else? Gasoline was the big one, and tires that affected us.
Yeah.
But when you come to think of the price that we paid for our freedom, it wasn't too much at all.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's true.
But we had dances, and the older men, of course, because there weren't any young men around really,
That's
they were
right.
in their heyday for the second time. All the girls danced with them. And there was a lot of goodwill, and everybody pitched in to do what they could.
Right. Were there a lot of people, a lot of young men and women from the Birtle area that
Yes,
signed
there
up?
were.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many, but
No.
now that I look back, there weren't many young men around. They were all away.
Was there much evidence of the war in Birtle? Did you see a lot of advertising?
Oh, always advertising.
Yeah.
Yes, like buy war-saving bonds,
Mm.
and loose lips can sink ships. You
Right.
know, the idea of secrecy and not talking about everything you knew about.
Right.
Of course, we didn't know much about what was going on. We were so far away from the war that it wasn't even funny. When I talked to our friends in England about how the war affected them, our friend Anne was eating rose hips, you know, the little
Yeah.
buds on roses. They had vitamin C in them, and they fed them to all those kids. And she was moved out of her home and sent away up into Scotland, and was so homesick that at last they sent her home.
Oh.
But she lived through the war, and the area was bombed all right, because they had an airfield just beside the town.
Right.
But now may I just add this, that my brother, my eldest brother, who was killed overseas, stayed with Anne and her family just 2 weeks before he was killed.
Oh.
So we are now friends with Anne and her husband, and they've been over here twice. And we're now planning for this coming year, 2001, that they will arrive here in May, and we'll all go up to Alaska.
Oh, that's fun.
And, so that's underway.
Oh, neat.
But it's the second generation of friends
Right,
that
right.
we've got there.
Oh, good.
And luckily enough, she lives right in the area where 6th Group, the Canadian bomber group, flew out of.
Oh.
So we have visited the different
Lots.
airfields, and
Yeah.
and of course my brother's grave in Harrigan.
Right, right.
But looking back, life went on pretty much as usual. We had a big rink, a good rink in Birtle, and airmen from New Zealand and Australia and England
Right.
often came from Yorkton and Brandon and other air bases to play hockey. They'd stay for the weekend. There'd be
Oh.
busloads of them come, and the people in town all took them in. And I talked to one of those airmen in New Zealand a couple of years ago.
Oh, neat.
And he remembered Birtle. He said, they said, now you, and you. And they went on, are going to play hockey now? He said, play hockey? I haven't even tried a pair of skates on in my life, you know.
Oh, no.
And he said they were the funniest games. And he
Oh, I
said,
bet.
we won because one of our guys pushed it along the ice as it crept along and shoved it in the goal. Pushed the puck along.
Oh.
So we had that along with other things. And,
Right.
just the same as in England, they took the boys in from
Right.
all over. We took them in, their boys in.
Did you have people staying at your house
Yes.
too then?
Oh, yes, we
Yeah.
had them. We also had some, one time sadly, for the funeral of a young airman who came from Beulah, lived right next door to us in Beulah, and he was killed in Calgary. He and a friend were walking home one night, and a car hit them and killed both of them.
Oh, no.
And so they buried him in Birtle because they thought we would always be there. And they were people who moved, and sadly we moved away from Birtle too. But we stop in and visit his grave every once in a while. He was 19 when he was killed.
Gosh.
But that was really, I guess, the first time the war really came home to me, that people were dying.
Yes.
I was only 8 when the war broke
Yeah.
out, you see. And so the brother next to me, who became a bomb aimer, or graduated from Winnipeg, he was with me at that time, with us, and I remember him taking me on his knee the first day war broke out. This was in Beulah.
Right.
I switched back and forth there. And I was asking him, what is war? And so he was trying to explain it to me. And I said, well, will we win it? And he said, I don't know. He said, Germany has an awful lot of men that are all equipped as soldiers that we'll have to beat before we win it. And, you know, it made an impression.
Yeah.
And, well, then it went on.
Yeah.
And after a while, we started to get some hope, because for a long time there was no news but bad news. And then my eldest brother, of course, went into the Air Force.
Yeah, what was that like for your family with your brother enlisting?
Well, I know my parents really questioned this because he just about finished being an engineer, or training for a civil engineer. And they knew the dangers of flying and of war, and but, you know, everyone had to go. And he had always wanted to fly from the age of 10, I suppose. Before that, there were little airplanes that came around and landed in pastures just near towns, and they'd take you up for a flight for $1.
Oh.
And that was in the 30s, you see. And oh boy, did he went up in that flight, all right. He had $1, and so he was always building kites and little model airplanes. And he worked in McDonnell Aircraft in Winnipeg building Ansons in the summer one year. And then he joined, and away he went. And he trained in Clare's home, Alberta.
Oh, okay.
Davidson, Saskatchewan, he soloed in a Cornell. And then he came to Brandon. And finished his training here on Cessna cranes.
Right.
And from there he went he graduated and got his commission as a pilot officer. And by that time he was married, and then he went to, Prince Edward Island,
Okay.
Summerside. More training in Ansons for coastal patrol. And then after that he went to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and flew Cansos out of there, Catalinas.
Right.
And then was sent overseas and flew out of Invergordon or Alness in Scotland.
Oh, okay.
And was killed there.
Right. Well, he was away, even in training. Did you get a lot of contact with him, writing letters back and forth, or did you hear from him?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, constantly.
So,
And of course, in the meantime, he fell in love.
right.
And was married just before he graduated.
Oh, I see.
And, well, in the spring, and he graduated in June. It was in May, I guess. Then he and his wife, she lived in Brandon here. They lived in an apartment.
Right.
And then he and his wife went to Summerside, and then to Yarmouth.
Oh,
and
she
then,
traveled with him.
yes,
Well, he
and
was a
then
kid.
afterwards. And then she had their first child, their only child as it turned out, and he was born in Yarmouth just when Garth was coming home on embarkation leave before he went overseas. And so then he went back to Montreal, and June Marie, his wife, came up from Yarmouth with the baby. And in those days, of course, there were no baby things being made.
No.
So what did they carry him in? They got a little grape basket
Oh.
and cut the end out of it because he was too long for it, and carried him along in that. And they were, Garth was around Montreal for a while before he flew overseas, so June Marie just stayed there. And little Garth slept in the bureau drawer.
Oh my gosh, eh?
And then they flew home.
Yeah.
And it was a year after that, I guess. Let's see. No, it was the same year.
Oh.
He was killed.
Oh.
Right. I have to watch those years.
Yeah,
But,
it's difficult,
yeah.
yeah.
He
Did
left in June and was killed in November.
Oh, I see. Did you get a chance to see him much while he was training here in Brandon? Did you ever see?
No, once I think while he was training, and then we came in here for his graduation.
Oh, you did?
And as you notice, I'm wearing my volunteer badge for this museum, which I'm proud to belong to and be able to work in, as is my wife Donna. But people say, why don't you work in Winnipeg? You know, there's a reason for that, because my brother graduated from this building, and as we step out the door into the hangar, I'm standing approximately where I stood when he marched up, and my mother pinned his wings on. His wife said to my mother, no, you pinned his wings on. Either of them could have. So my mother pinned them on. And so that it's sentimental reasons
Yes.
who we work here.
Do you remember his graduation well?
Oh, yes.
How'd you feel when you saw him?
So proud.
I bet.
I was very proud of my brothers and my sister who worked in Ottawa, but very proud of those guys. I'll tell you just one little thing. When he was home on his embarkation leave, we were living in Bertle.
Right.
And I was in school, and so this one day I said to him, do you think you could meet me at school at 4 o'clock? And he said, yeah, I guess I could, Joe. They called me Joe because I was a fighter.
Oh.
I had to fight with two older brothers to survive.
Right.
No, they were very good. But anyway, they, pardon me, he said, I guess I could. And I said, don't wear your raincoat. And he kind of looked at me, and then he said, okay. And I wanted everybody to see him because he really looked great in a uniform, and in his officer's uniform he looked just that much smarter. Yeah. And so I was just boasting to the others a little bit. But there I came out of school, and across the street he was standing, and I just ran over it and kind of looked around to see who was watching. But yeah, they were great days in my life, and I had a great deal of pride in these young fellas who were going away. And little did I realize what the cost was, because we didn't know much about the war, and we didn't know much about people being killed, and at least I didn't, because I was too young. But later on we realized how many had been killed in the whole area that to buy our freedom. But they were good days. I'll never forget those days. Yeah. But they brought a lot of sadness to a lot of families, and I suppose I'm just speaking on behalf of many of those families, and many my age who went through the same thing. We were all kind of oblivious to really what was happening. And as we've traveled overseas so many times, and I thank those young men for that freedom that we've bought, and we've gone to so many cemeteries where those young men lie, and paid our respects to them. It wasn't until I saw them that you realize the terrific cost of war. And all those bright young men that should have been a part of Canada and raised families and done great things, because they were there. There were lots of them that did great things but died at it. But it wasn't until we saw them, saw the cemeteries, and then into the death camps that we visited. 17 of them now, 15 on the last trip. But then you realize why we had to go to war and why those young men had to pay the price. But we've also made a lot of great contacts throughout Europe with people that we're in contact with even now. And by and large, the Canadians are really treated very well by the people. The people of Holland especially, they just think we're next to God. The one couple invited us home one night. They'd only met us 10 minutes or 20 minutes before, and they invited us home for the night. We're still in contact with them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it's great.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Did you have much contact with your sister in Ottawa?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yes, well, there were letters. The phones were expensive
Right.
at that time. But every once in a while we had a phone call back and forth. And it took you, you couldn't get through. You had to place a phone call with the operator in your town, and then she worked through to Winnipeg, probably to Brandon, to Winnipeg, and then to Toronto, and then to Ottawa,
Gosh.
So, like times like Christmas Day or New Year's Day, you put the call in early in the morning, and it sometimes came through 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Holy smokes.
But you wouldn't dare leave home.
Yeah, not like today.
Not like today,
You
that's
can
right.
take your phone with you now.
Yeah. We always had contact with Shirley, and my other brother then went into the Air Force, and,
Right.
and he graduated out of Winnipeg as a bomb aimer. And
Was he posted overseas, your
no,
other brother?
he didn't get overseas. They were sent down to Three Rivers, Quebec,
Oh, okay.
and to take commando training,
Oh.
which was a lot of garbage. It was to put in time,
Mhm.
and during that course he ripped all the tendons out of his knee, so he has suffered with that ever since.
Yeah.
It's always been a nuisance and a pain.
Right.
But he was in the hospital there for a while, and then they sent him home, and he went as far as Ottawa, where my sister was, and spent a few days. He was in such pain he couldn't travel anymore on the train, and then came to Bertel and was home just in time to get the news that my brother had been killed. He was only home a couple of days before the telegram came, so he came and got me at school.
Oh.
And
When was that?
that was November the 26th, 1944. And I always remember a poem that had come out at that time, and we'd had it in the school, and it was called Missing Believed Killed. And it was written by a father who'd lost his son. And it started out, and I only know the first few words in it, missing believed killed. These cold, concise, official words do but convey that this my son no longer breathes the air. And I've never been able to get a hold of that. Somewhere I'll find it, but anyway, that was it, and he was there, and we all, spent a day, more or less, just waiting, and the next day, of course, the second telegram came saying that he was officially killed. But since that time, of course, with our connections, I have met the medical officer who went up to the crash and identified the bodies, or tried to identify the bodies. They were not all identified. And we were in contact with him until a couple of years ago, when he died of a massive heart attack. So that was cut off. But he took me to the place where the plane crashed, and I told him what the weather was like in Bertel that morning and what we were doing, and he talked about there was a little snow there at the time, and showed me the exact spot the plane came down. And also a lady who was living in the last little house in that town, and they managed to get the airplane around the house so it didn't hit it, but it crashed just 100 yards beyond. And she was sleeping at the time because it was 6:32 in the morning when they crashed, and there was just a boom, she said, and she woke up.
Do they know what caused the crash of the aircraft, or?
The general consensus is that it was sabotage. And there have been a number of planes, same planes, Sunderlands, from that base, had taken off and developed the same problems, and they think that they were pretty close to catching whoever was doing this, because there were a number of planes that had crashed.
Right.
The one was had the Duke of Kent on board, and he was killed just after takeoff. But anyway, I've been in contact with nearly all the families of the crew. The last one I have the address for now, and I shall get to them. It took a long time. It's taken 13 years since I started tracking them down. But it's every once in a while from that little town in Scotland, one of our friends cut something out of the paper regarding that crash, and I just came across a couple of them here when I was looking for things to bring out here.
Right.
But you know, they say this is the day that, or the newspaper prints, you know, 50 years ago or whatever,
Right.
Plane crashed on the railroad track, and all 11 Canadians were killed.
And your brother and the crew are all buried.
All buried in Harrogate. They took them down to England, to Harrogate, which is a beautiful cemetery. It was the gathering spot for those who had been killed from 6th Group, from the RCAF. But they took them down from Scotland, buried them there. I don't know why, because there are other crews that are buried up there. But those cemeteries are not very well kept. They're in church cemeteries, and sometimes they look a little neglected. But there's one young gentleman from Dauphin that's buried in one of those cemeteries.
Oh, really?
And didn't realize that here till just a year or so ago. But anyway, it's a beautiful cemetery.
Yeah.
There are 999 airmen buried in that cemetery, and 666 are Canadians. So
Holy smokes.
it's a large cemetery too.
Yeah.
And we have attended the Battle of Britain, or the Battle of Britain ceremonies that they hold each year all through England, on the Sunday closest to the 15th of September, when the Battle of Britain was more or less officially won. And one year we planned it so we would be there. We were treated just wonderfully by the mayor and the lady who's at the head of the Royal Air Force Association. And we went and stood with her through the ceremony. She asked us if we would stand with her. And she took part in the ceremony, of course.
Right.
But we stood with her until she had to go up and go through the acts that she had to go through.
Right, yeah.
But it's a place, our friends, this lady Anne I told you about, live only 20 miles from there.
Oh.
And so each year, and it happened again this year, we get a phone call from Anne and her husband Roland that they have been over to Harrogate and put flowers on Garth's grave. And we also had phone calls all around between Garth's son. Garth was the one that was killed. Garth's son out in BC, my sister in Chatham, Ontario, and my brother in Sandy Hook, Manitoba. And we all, that day is a sacred day.
Yeah.
The day he was killed.
What was it like?
Oh, that's the 26th we
Right.
get that phone call.
Right.
Yeah, but on the 11th we get the others. And often we phone that day too.
Right. What was it like for your family getting notice that your brother had been killed in action?
Devastating, devastating. That's all I can say. I always say my mother began to die that day. It affected her right through her life, as it did an awful lot of other mothers, and you can't blame them. But as I have said, it left a void in our family and in our lives that we never forget. And I'll just mention that my sister was visiting here again this summer, and she and my brother and I got together. And as we were talking, my sister said, "But if Garth hadn't died, you know, so he's still in the picture. He's always there. He would have been 78 this year, and so you know, if he had lived a long life, he'd have been with us. He was the one with the brains in the family, and was always inventing something, and was really a great guy, as my other brother is, and as my sister is. We've always been a family that grew up with a lot of love in our family, and then devastation at that point. But it's something to live with.
Yeah.
You can only imagine what a mother who lost 4 boys felt like, and that happened. That happened. So it's
Hard to imagine.
yeah. But anyway, would you like me to go on with with any other details of crashes or anything.
What else do you think we should do?
I don't know. That maybe covers perhaps as much as we should mention. His wife later on, by the way, I say Garth's wife later on remarried.
Oh, okay.
And young Garth, the baby, stayed with her. My parents offered to take him and raise him, but she said, no, he is my child. And Garth really thought if anything happened that I should raise him. And her second husband had agreed to that he would retain the name of Johnson, but they would raise him. Well, he later on, her second husband was involved in atomic energy research in Ottawa, right from the start, or in Chalk River.
Oh.
And right from the start, he was down there. And he later on died of a massive heart attack and left her widowed for the second time. She had a hard life.
Yeah.
Her father was shell-shocked in the First War, which means that he went all to pieces, and was never with them after that. So she was raised by her mother. Then met Garth and married him and lost him within a couple of years or so. And then her second husband died of a heart attack. So, but you know, you would never know it from June Marie. She was always a brick.
And your family kept in contact with her?
With her, yes. And she and her husband came to visit us, and later on, Little Garth, as we call him, came up to stay with us. In the summertime, he would come and stay with us. And then he joined the Air Force and was overseas in Germany for a couple of stints of about 2 years apiece, I believe. And their son was born in Lahr and was the New Year's baby. And he is also called Garth. But they had, like June Marie, Garth's wife, was June Marie Laycock. So Little Garth was Garth Laycock Johnson. And then their son was Garth, what was her name? Gray, I'll say, Gray Johnson. And then his the third one's son, they said, we've got enough Garths around here. So they called him Cody Garth. But the name Garth still there. Still carries on. But anyway, that was the war as I saw it. And now my wife and I come to the museum to volunteer as often as we can. And we travel around, especially around the 11th of November, showing slides to schools, legions, churches, anyone that wishes us, to try to impress on people that we must never forget those young fellows. There's a thing about history, you know, there's a saying that a nation who forgets its history is bound to repeat it. And I'd like that not to happen.
Yes, me too.
But sometimes I think we really don't treat the memory of those young fellows the way we should. Many of the younger generation know nothing about our history, know nothing about the wars, and that's part of Canada. We lost our 2 generations of young men and women in those wars. But we show the pictures of cemeteries, and many of them personal pictures of young men we knew and I knew.
Right.
And so anyway, that's the best I can do, or best we can do. But we love traveling and feel. Sometimes my wife says we don't see a lot of other things like cemeteries, and I say, well, you know, in between we do. But I feel my first obligation is to those young men in the cemetery, and we bring back pictures for families that have never been able to go there, and I've been lucky enough to be able to go there, so I bring those back. But anyway, that's possibly all we
Yeah.
need to say.
Well, thanks for coming in all the way here to talk to us.
Well, you're quite welcome. It's my privilege. Thank you.